We are back on MorningLine. Thanks for joining us on this Wednesday. Great conversation this morning with our guests as we talk about the opioid crisis in Tennessee. The two of them are behind some current legislation that will toughen some of the laws for those who illegally sell these drugs. Steve Dickerson's with us. He's a state senator. Representative Bryan is a representative. You two are in this together on that, and you both happen to be physicians, anesthesiologists. Thank you for coming on. And we've got more phone calls. I thought they were waiting. I have so many questions for you, but let's see what Susie has in mind. Susie, good morning.
Good morning, Nick. How are you?
Good, Susie. What's on your mind?
Well, with the opiates, I know that a lot of people start out on the lower tabs, and then once they fail a drug test and they can't get them, then they're going to the streets. But then you also have the drug users that want to get clean, and the withdrawal is a horrible process, I'm told. And so they try these Suboxones, the strips or the pills. Yeah. But a lot of the doctor's office that offer the Suboxones, they either range from $200 to $300 an office visit.
Wow.
And then your prescriptions is really high. And then most of the users, I'm sure, they don't have insurance, but then most of them are cash. So how are they supposed to get help if they want it? But then again, some of them are getting high off the Suboxones.
Okay, Susie brings up a good point. Suboxone, which is that to wean you off, but that essentially is a drug too? Or what do you think, guys?
Well, yeah, Suboxone is a technical term is an agonist-antagonist. Right. It has the agonist properties is it has like morphine type qualities, but the antagonist it has Narcan type qualities. So it's properties. So it's kind of a mixture of that. And so one of the things, like when there's drugs that we can give from an anesthetic and a surgery standpoint or a recovery room standpoint that reverses a little bit of the side effects without reversing so much the pain effects of opioids. And we use Stadol or Nubain or something like that that can do that. It's very similar to Suboxone. What she's talking about, some of the addiction that she's, some of these clinics, and it's an issue is getting people into treatment. I think Dr. Dickerson had mentioned that. I've spoken recently with Congressman Harris and Congressman Desjardins, and some of the things that they're looking at from the federal level is getting resources back to the state to deal with that aspect and the addiction aspect of narcotics, and that's one of the multifaceted problems that we have in the state. You can go into rehab, and the relapse rate is reports I've read of up to 90%. Wow. And I think maybe up to 50% in the first week after you come out. And a lot of these programs are only 28 days. Insurance may only cover 28 days.
It's expensive, yeah.
And it's expensive, but you really, depending on what you're using, and especially if you start injecting medications, it's harder, and you have a much higher risk of relapse.
How long should someone really be in rehab to maybe have a best shot? The best shot, I know nothing's guaranteed, of getting clean.
So I'm not an addictionologist, nor is Bryan, but certainly, a month inpatient is not unreasonable, but really it's a lifetime process. You need access to mental health professionals throughout the rest of your life, I would say. And to sort of build on what he said, and to get to some of the questions our caller had, Suboxone now sort of fills the role that methadone used to fill. That is, it's sort of a replacement. It's drug-assisted recovery, really is what it is. You substitute a medication that's pharmacological properties are a little more manageable, but it doesn't mean that medicine can't be abused also.
So that you can be addicted to Suboxone?
Yeah, you can.
Okay.
And it operates, it's in a very interesting area the way that it's prescribed. It's supposed to only be prescribed with a special DEA license. I think it's a DEA-X license, and you're supposed to have a limited number of patients that you prescribe. Its only indication, I believe, in Tennessee now, based on a bill that I passed about 3 or 4 years ago, is for assistance with opiate-dependent patients. And so that whole area is a little nebulous. But to get back to I think that's probably a bit of a euphemism. Too. It's a gray area. But to get back to, I think that one of the central points here is we're working on the illegal side of it, sort of the drug trafficking side of it. The bigger issue, if we really want to get our arms around this, in my opinion, is the mental health side of it. We do not have access to adequate numbers of addictionologists, mental health professionals, therapists, psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, and a lot of the patients, as your caller alluded to, don't have the resources to access those folks, even if they were there. And so I've actually had some discussions now with the administration. I'm trying to come up with some mechanism to broaden access to that, because I really do think going forward we're seeing an uptick in alcohol use, we're seeing an uptick in suicide rates, we're seeing some pretty disturbing trends that are not just related to opiates, but they're more of a societal trend. I can't really figure out what the unifying theme is there. There's some reason why this is occurring in our state, and it's actually nationwide. Maybe it's despondency, unemployment, underemployment. There are all sorts of theories as to why this occurs. But the one thing that we really need is access to high-quality mental health care.
Yeah, and every sheriff you'll talk to will tell you the same thing. Right. If it's you in Rutherford County, Sheriff Hall here, tell you there's just not the capacity for the mental health or the drug treatment.
So it's very common in local ERs for people to come in with this sort of crisis, and they can't get access to an inpatient treatment for 2, 3, 4 days, and they'll sit in the emergency room sometime 4 days on end waiting to have access to
and
counseling.
Talk about expensive, sitting in an emergency room. Let's go to Laura. Laura, good morning. Hi, Laura.
Yes, good morning.
Good morning. What's on your mind, Laura?
Yes, I have a question. I wanted to ask the doctors.
Sure.
I wanted to know why isn't some of that, like people taking other people's urine up in the doctor's office? How are they getting by with that?
You mean faking a drug test?
Yes, sir. Some of them are running there with other people's urine and come out with.
Yeah, I've heard of that. I mean, people getting drug tested, bringing in someone else's urine in a package in their pants.
Sure. So no matter what sort of parameters, what sort of restraints, what sort of qualifications we set on any sort of, test or, process in our society, somebody's going to figure out some way to end run it. But the principle is, if you have a patient who's on one of these medications from time to time, maybe on a regularly scheduled basis, but then also randomly, you want to check to make sure that they're actually taking the medication that's prescribed and not taking other medications, legal or illicit. And so urine drug screening is sort of the gold standard within the chronic pain management world. Most patients are very compliant. You give them a cup, they give you a urine sample. Some folks, however, are bringing in other folks' urine, and there's no foolproof mechanism.
Can you have a nurse stand there and watch?
Yeah, it gets to that point. Sometimes you actually do have to do that.
I've heard in some cases that happens.
Because you go by body temperature in part. If it's sitting in your purse and it's 72 degrees and you pour it in the cup, then it's obvious. But if you keep it in a baggie, strapped to your chest, it could be about 98.6 degrees. And so it depends on how stringent, how high you want to set that bar, what sort of resources you can actually focus on making sure patients are compliant.
To add to that, if you another mechanism you can drug test somebody is taking a hair sample.
Well, not in my case.
But you can look at a hair sample and they can determine, if somebody's had opioids in their system, and
that's correct.
So that's a longer term. If somebody's trying to fool you with a urine sample, take a hair sample, and they'll
so
tell
those
the
are the most convenient. Can blood screens also do that? I know that's more involved, but will blood tell you what's in there too?
It can, but urine is really easy to do, and it's very cost effective to do it that way.
Yeah, that makes the most sense. All right, let's go to Nikki. Hi, Nikki. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning. What's on your mind?
I was just sitting there watching your guys' program, and I have suffered back pain and had about 13 different injections, and I go to the IPS center here in Bowling Green, and I was listening to them earlier about the medical marijuana, and I think that would be a great idea to try to bring to Kentucky as well, because I worked in a rehab for almost 10 years, and I've seen a lot of people suffer. And the gentleman to the left on this news show is absolutely right. People do not OD from marijuana, but it is the pills that are taking lives. It is the ignorance from the pills. And they are placebo also. The pain meds, some of the pain meds that they prescribe to people are placebos, just as well as it was a Depakote or a valproic acid.
Have you had to deal with addiction on some of these pills? Have you been given a lot of opioids for your treatment of your back?
For the last 2 years, I was prescribed medication. I failed a drug screen for marijuana, and they took my pills.
Okay.
So,
Right.
Yeah, and that puts her in the corner there. She's trying to find a better way, and then they take away her pills. And
well, you know, that's oftentimes when I talk about different issues, whether it's this, I talk about James Madison, to paraphrase, said that, you know, there are two threats to liberty. There's abuse of liberty, and there's tyranny. And unfortunately, in a lot of what we're dealing with the opioids, the abuse of liberty, you have the pill mills, you have patients that are going out there and drug seeking. And then on the other hand, you have bills or laws or, you know, different regulations that are, you may push the legitimate patients and the legitimate prescribers and practitioners, you're pushing them out. And they're looking at, you know, where can they go for help? What modalities can they get?
They'll hit the streets if they have
and
to.
And if they have to, chronic pain is something where if they can't get treatment, I mean, if you're living 24/7, you know, how are you going to get help?
Yeah,
and so,
that's hard.
So what we have to do, like he said, the Goldilocks, where do you find that balance of not abuse, you know, the bad actors and the abuse of liberty? How do you deal with that and not do something tyrannical
where
you're pushing?
like
exactly.
Right. Yeah, well, I sympathize with her.
And I think in this debate, obviously, Tennessee was one of the early states to have the wave of opiate problems sweep over. It's a nationwide problem now.
Sure.
The thing we have to remember, though, there are thousands and thousands of patients in our state who are chronic pain sufferers. People like her who've had, you know, multiple back surgeries. She said she'd had 12, you know, 14 injections. I have had patients literally who've had 20 spinal surgeries.
Unbelievable.
You know, they're fused from their sacrum, from their hips, basically up to the back of their skull. And you know, we have to make sure that in our zeal and our rush to control the abuse, that we also have sort of a landing spot for the patients and the practitioners who are who are suffering from you know, debilitating chronic pain. And the people who are trying to treat them, which again, that's what I do through most of my practice. But you know, imagine somebody with diabetic neuropathy feels like their feet are on fire all the time. Imagine having, you know, the sensation of having a match held to your feet, you know, 24 hours a day. That's a life-altering event. You know, we have illnesses that I treat, things you know, like nerve palsies and nerve pains and things like that they call suicide diseases. The pain is so bad, if untreated, people will kill themselves instead of suffering from those 24 hours a day. And so we have to remember, this is a social issue. It is a statewide issue. It's an important public health issue. But we also have thousands of patients who are suffering. We need to make sure that and again, in our push to control the abuse, that we have sort of, you know, the Goldilocks, the happy spot where we can also have people like her get appropriate treatment.
Understood. All right, let's take a break on that note. We'll come back, our final segment, more of your calls with our guests right after this.